Scott M. Sullivan, and he is a convert to the Catholic faith. He has a website, apostolate called The Classical Theist. His tagline is, "Train your mind for Christ's sake," which I love. He's a homeschooling father of 8. And I told him, I think his wife said, "Yeah, you can go to Dallas for the conference, but you're taking half the kids with you." So you're not leaving me with all 8 kids, so you can go talk to a bunch of men. He holds a PhD in philosophy from the University of St. Thomas in Houston. He is the producer of numerous video courses in the area of logic and philosophy. Now get this, he's a member of the Committee on Logic for the American Catholic Physiological Association Committee on Priestly Formation. I'll say that 10 times. I hardly could say it once. He is an author of a book called An Introduction to Traditional Logic, St. Thomas Aquinas, and the Principle of Sufficient Reason. He's also working on another book, which is called The Thomistic Teleological Argument. He's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's a kickboxing competitor, and he held the heavyweight title in shootboxing. His website is scottmsullivan.com. So please give a big thank you and a big, big welcome to Dr. Scott Sullivan.
I was asked to introduce my helpers today. You know, it was a part of the deal that on the last minute notice I had to bring almost half. I have 8 kids. I brought 3 of my kids. So come on up here, little girls. These are my helpers, by the way, from the booth. Give them one hand. This is my oldest. By the way, we all have Irish names. So this is Reagan. This is Grady, and what's your name? Ailish. This is Ailish, yes. Did you have some words you want to say? No, just kidding. They're nervous. Okay. All right, thank you, girls. All right. All right. Oh yes, yeah, water's a good thing. Okay. How many people in here have ever heard of the book The God Delusion by the atheist Richard Dawkins? Okay, some. How many people have read that book at all? Even a few pages? 1. Okay, that's all right. You know, it's not the kind of thing that people who run in these sorts of circles read, right? But a lot of people do. It was a New York Times bestseller, and the whole point of the book, of course, The God Delusion, is to convince the reader that belief in God, is a delusion, and that the atheistic worldview is true. God does not exist. That's the point of the book. All right. And so even though people like yourselves don't read that book, you have to understand that a lot of people do. Has a big impact on our culture. Let me give you just one example. A friend of mine is a professor of theology at the Franciscan University of Steubenville. And he told me about a time when there at the university, there were 3 students, 3 Catholic young ladies, students at Franciscan. And they got together one night, and they got to talking about this book, The God Delusion. And 2 of the 3 said that, you know what, this would be kind of a cool thing to do. Let's buy this book, let's read it, so we can make fun of the silly arguments given by the atheists. That'd be just a nice little recreational thing to do, to kind of read this atheist book and, make short work of him. That would be kind of fun, they thought. So, they read the book, but that's not what happened. What happened was that by the time these 2 girls got to the end of the book, they became convinced by the arguments of the atheists. These girls became atheists themselves. And they started going back to that 3rd girl, teasing her as to why she believes in all that silly God stuff, you see. And this is just one example of what's going on in our culture today. I have some very troublesome stats I wanted to share with you. That since the year 2000, so this report came out in 2014, so we're talking about a 14-year time span, okay? Since the year 2000, 14 million Catholics have left the faith. A million a year. Infant baptism has dropped by 28%. Adult baptism has dropped by 31%. Sacramental Catholic marriages have dropped by a whopping 41%. And for every person who joins the church on Easter, 4 more leave. So you got a net loss of 3, right? So I think it's safe to say that we are living in an age of mass apostasy, right? It's important to realize that we live in a post-Christian culture. A culture that once, tried Christianity but has now moved on. It's kind of like been there, done that. And there's a lot of hostility today, morally and intellectually speaking, against belief in God and the Catholic Church. And there are a lot of factors for this, both inside and outside the church. But I want to focus on just one thing, one fundamental problem that I think a lot of people miss, okay? And the fundamental problem is this, that most people in the world do not think Catholicism is true. You see what I'm saying? Most people don't think Catholicism is true. I mean, atheists, Muslims, whatever. If they thought it were true, they'd be Catholic, but they're not, so they don't. You see what I'm saying? And so what I'm pointing out here is that there is a huge intellectual front to the culture war. It's not just a moral battle. It's not just a spiritual battle. It's also an intellectual battle. It's a clash of ideas, a clash of worldviews. Whose worldview is right, you see? And that's what I want to talk about, because what I think every Catholic needs to know about their faith is that there are good reasons for thinking that it's true. And this topic is especially dear to my heart, and let me tell you why. When I was young, I was raised in a loving evangelical Christian home, right? I went to church on Sundays. Sometimes I watched Billy Graham on TV. I even saw Billy Graham live one time. Born again, all that stuff, okay? But like many Christians, when I got into high school, I fell away from the Christian faith. I became an agnostic. That's someone who's not sure that God exists or not. Okay? That's what I was. Not primarily because I was this big, huge sinner, although of course I was a sinner, but mostly for intellectual reasons. You see, growing up, I had never been given any good reason to think that all this Christian stuff is true. I thought it was kind of like a Santa Claus for grown-ups. You see what I'm saying? And so that's what I did. I was an agnostic. I went off to college that way. As he mentioned, I was a professional kickboxer, which, by the way, doesn't pay very much money. So I had to supplement my income as a bouncer. What else is a kickboxer supposed to do? It's a funny, one time I was sitting there working in this bar, working the door, and I got to thinking about Christianity and why I wasn't a Christian anymore. And I just felt this burning desire to write down all of my reasons why I'm not a Christian anymore. So I went to the bartender, I said, give me one of those tabs, they write the drinks on. And so I'm literally sitting there in this bar, I mean, music's blaring, lights are flashing, and I'm writing down all of my so-called irrefutable arguments against Christianity. I got this one and this one. I'm thinking I'm really smart. I mean, man, no one's ever thought of this before. Here I am in this bar right now. I got it, I had about three pages or so. Come to find out later on that my arguments were not so original. They were not so irrefutable. As a matter of fact, they had all been addressed and debunked by the church fathers, but that's another story. Anyway, it came time to graduate college, okay? And I thought, all right, I was kind of on this 10-year plan, like I couldn't really I was going to be a lawyer and then a historian, so it took a long time when you change all your majors like that. You got to make up those credit hours, right? So then I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to graduate now, BA in history. What am I going to do with the rest of my life? And so that brought this question, well, what's the purpose of life anyway? You see what I'm saying? So like this event of graduating college sparked this philosophical question about the meaning of life. And so I began to investigate religion again, but I wasn't going to do it because it made me feel good. I didn't want a placebo. I wanted to be intellectually honest. And so I started looking into different things. And so one time I decided to go into Barnes & Noble in the religion section. Who's ever been to the religion section in Barnes & Noble? Man, there's all kinds of crazy stuff. It's like a spiritual mind. There's no telling what divination with crystals and talking to porpoise. I mean, it's crazy stuff, right? So, but by God's grace, I just walked right up to the shelf, and I don't know why, but there was a book there with a blue spine, pulled it off. A handbook of Christian Apologetics by Peter Kraft and Ronald Shelley. What is this? I started looking at this book. Philosophical arguments for the existence of God. I've never heard any of this. Historical arguments for the divinity of Jesus Christ. The reliability of the Gospels, why they're historical. I never heard any of this stuff. I thought, this is amazing. This book changed my life. What? I became kind of ticked off, actually, because in all my years of upbringing as a Christian, no one ever taught me this stuff. In Sunday school we were drawing, coloring pictures and stuff, but we never taught that. And I was kind of ticked off because if someone had told me that, I never would have left Christianity. See what I'm saying? So I decided at that time then, to devote my life to this cause, and that's what I do, have an apostolate now, as he was so kind to mention, where I help other people see the rationality of belief in God and the Catholic faith, and I went on to do a doctorate in philosophy for all those reasons, because a lot of these issues, by the way, are philosophical in nature. All right, that's enough about me. Here's why all this is important for you, okay? How many people here have kids, children? Look at that, man. All right. Me too. I got 8. All right, got 3 here. How many here want your kids to stay in their faith when they grow up until they die? That's like the most important thing as your parent, right? Absolutely, me too. All right, that is our hope. Here's the reality. The reality is that your kids will probably lose their faith. At least that's what the stats say. And the numbers typically don't lie. Why does this happen? Okay, this is what I think, so just kind of follow me here. Take your typical 19-year-old Christian girl, all right? She's, let's say she's 19 years old, raised Catholic all her life, a virtuous young lady, her will has been formed, her moral formation is sound. This girl, man, is solid. She desires the true good. But now it's time for her to go off to college. And there she begins to encounter various moral temptations, right? Temptations which she's never had to deal with before, temptations that go against her upbringing as a Catholic Christian. Temptations that are enticing not only in themselves, but also because of the social benefits they'll bring, right? I mean, you'll be cool, you'll be liked, you'll fit in if you do these things. And like any temptation, these temptations seem attractive. Part of her wants to engage in them. I mean, after all, come on. She wants to fit in. She wants to be cool. She wants to be liked. She wants to have fun. But her faith has taught her that these things are wrong, that she should not do them. See, so this inner struggle intensifies, right? She reasons that even though I feel enticed to doing X, whatever sin X is, even though I feel enticed to doing it, I feel pulled towards X. She reasons that I cannot do X because my faith says X is wrong. My faith says I should not do these things. But now comes another sort of challenge. She's told by her liberal arts teachers, she's told by impressive sounding science professors, that human origins can be completely explained by a process of genetic mutation and natural selection. She's told by her liberal arts teachers things like all truth is relative, that Christians are bigots and did horrible things in history, that we should all be tolerant, and that the Bible is just full of myths, stories, and contradictions. So she begins to feel embarrassed about telling her friends she's Christian. She begins to doubt her faith, you see. So check this out. That one thing that was keeping her from acting on those temptations, her faith, is now eroding. She wonders, how do I even know my faith is true? And if it's not true, then why can't I go out and do all these fun things? She goes to her mom for her help. Mom doesn't have any answers. She goes to her pastor for help. Her pastor tells her she has to have faith. Okay. But she knows that's what all religious people say, right? She wants to know why she should have this faith rather than some other faith, or maybe no faith at all. And the people she trusts the most cannot give her an answer. See, this poor girl, this poor Christian girl, has been naively sent off to the front lines of a war, the culture war. She is untrained, she is ill-equipped, and she is exposed and vulnerable to all these moral and intellectual challenges against her faith. What do you think she's going to do now? Well, did you know that a number of surveys have shown that 60 to 90% of Christian kids lose their faith in high school or college? Sure, there are a number of reasons for this, but I would like to suggest to you that a principal reason is because these kids have never been given any reason why they should believe their faith. They've never been trained in how to deal with these intellectual challenges against their faith. She had a good moral formation. She knew her catechism. As far as that goes, she could answer those kinds of questions. But as St. Thomas Aquinas taught, the will must work in cooperation with the intellect. And she cannot deal with these intellectual challenges against her faith. If the intellect falls, the will falls too, you see. Dare we say it? Her parents have done her a disservice. Her Catholic community has done her a disservice. In all those years of being raised Catholic, she was never given any reasons to think that her faith is true. The most important thing in the world was her faith, and she was never given any good reasons to think that it's true. She was never trained in what was classically called the Demonstratio Christiana, the science that shows that Jesus Christ claimed and proved himself to be a divine messenger sent by God to preach a doctrine of salvation that is obligatory in all men. Science better known as Christian apologetics. She learned a lot of cool stuff. Learned some math, learned some Latin, learned some violin. But her education didn't cover these things. So now she's starting to think that the Christian faith is just a Santa Claus for grown-ups. And if you think I'm just making this stuff up, I have an article here from the National Catholic Register. I'm just going to read a piece of it to you. Catholics are leaving the faith by age 10, so what can parents do about it? Young Catholics are leaving the faith at an early age, sometimes before the age of 10. And their reasons are deeper than just being bored at Mass, according to the author of a new report. Those that are leaving for no religion, and a pretty big component of them saying they are either atheist or agnostic. It turns out when you probe a bit more deeply and you allow them to talk in their own words, they are bringing up things that are related to science and a need for evidence and a need for proof, said Mark Gray, a senior research associate at the Center for Applied Research at the Apostolate at Georgetown. It's almost a crisis in faith, he said. in the whole concept of faith, this is a generation that is struggling with faith in ways that we have not seen in previous generations. In exploring why young Catholics were choosing to leave their faith, he noted, quote, an emerging profile of youth who say they find the faith incompatible with what they are learning in high school or at the university level. In a perceived battle between the Catholic Church and science, the Church is losing. And it's losing Catholics at a very young age. A typical age for this decision to leave was made at 13. And of those who left the faith, only 13% said they were ever likely to come back. And absent any big changes in their life, they probably aren't coming back. But check this out. The most common reason for leaving the Catholic faith by 1 in 5 was that they stopped believing in God or religion. This was evidence of a desire among some of them for proof, for evidence of what they're learning about the religion and about God. It is a trend in the popular culture to see atheism as smart and faith as a fairy tale. So, my purpose today to you guys is just to relay one simple point. As Catholics, as Catholic dads, and for heaven's sake, we absolutely must teach ourselves and the next generation how to deal with the intellectual assaults against our faith. To paraphrase the great Christian thinker of the 20th century, Francis Schaeffer, if this generation doesn't give answers, the next generation will think, must not be it. You see, most Catholics have absolutely no idea what to say when someone asks them, why do you believe in Jesus? Why not faith in something else? Why Jesus? Why not faith in Islam or the tooth fairy? You see, what makes your blind faith any different than theirs? Catholics ought to have a good answer to that question. But the problem is that the answers Catholics usually give to that question are, in fact, very bad. Bad answer number 1, well, that's just what my parents taught me. See, that answer is okay when you're 5. It's not okay when you're 25. Bad answer number 2, well, I just believe on blind faith. Yeah, well, so does everybody else in all the other different religions too. What makes your blind faith any better than their blind faith? Bad answer number 3. My faith is just based on strong feelings or sentiments. Well, you know what? Catholics aren't the only ones with strong feelings or sentiments, right? I mean, a lot of people have strong feelings and sentiments about their religion. But feeling is not knowledge. You need something more. Now, what makes this so sad is, like I said at the beginning, there are, in fact, good reasons for thinking that the Catholic faith is true. There are good answers to this question, in other words, right? Traditionally, Catholicism, Christianity, has had a very strong intellectual tradition and a very well thought out worldview. In fact, I think Catholicism is the most well thought out and rational worldview on the planet. But many Christians today have forgotten all this and instead have adopted a warped and distorted, anti-intellectual, blind faith, counterfeit form of Christianity that has been condemned. It's better known by the name of fideism, the heresy of fideism. The heresy of fideism is blind faith Christianity and could be characterized as Santa Claus Christianity. You see, the true Christian position, the Catholic position, is that God has acted in human history, and in doing so has left traces of his activity, traces that are open to rational investigation and argument. In other words, from all the different religions in the world, human reason can determine which one of those religions is true. You see. And people need to know this Catholics need to know this. Catholics cannot afford today to be ignorant of these things anymore. People need to be shown that it's possible today for intelligent, well-educated people to rationally accept the Christian faith. You see, reason and evidence, these are the strong points of Christianity. And it's just foolish, it's craziness to lay these weapons aside in today's culture war. So, let me give you 3 reasons why you and your loved ones should become well-versed and educated in Christian apologetics. Number 1, Scripture commands it, right? You guys know the verse? 1 Peter 3:15. Always be prepared to give an answer to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you. Number 2, apologetics can strengthen the faith of believers. The faith just becomes more deeply rooted in the person who knows the reasons for his or her faith. You see, if you insist on a strictly emotion-based faith, you're just shortchanging yourself out of this incredibly rich intellectual side of the Catholic tradition. Reason number 3, the most obvious one perhaps. Apologetics can help unbelievers come to the faith by removing intellectual obstacles. People say things like, well, arguments never bring anybody to the faith. Not true. St. Augustine, a ton of people have been brought to the faith because of apologetical arguments, okay? You see, it's not just moral obstacles to the faith. Some people think, well, the reason why Joe Blow is not a Catholic is because he's got some kind of moral hang-up. That's not the only reason. Like I said, some people aren't Catholics because they don't think it's true. You see, I have a friend of mine. She's a microbiologist, and she's an atheist. We were having a talk one time, and she said, you know what, Scott, what gets me is that I ask Christians all the time, why do you guys believe what you do? This girl's a scientist, okay? And she goes, you know what, Scott? They never have an answer. They never have an answer. I think if you're unable to give an answer, then you do a disservice to those who come to you with questions. Christianity is a viable option for thinking people, and we need to be able to show them that. So, I want to strongly encourage all of us, all Christians, all Catholic dads, heads of the family, learn the arguments by which your faith is defended. And you got to take positive action, right? To do this, you got to kind of educate yourself and your children in the science of apologetics. And for Catholics, this means education on all 3 levels. You see, when it comes to Catholic apologetics, people typically think of how to dialogue with Protestants about where's Mary in the Bible. You see, that's there we go. Okay. That's a good question. You can talk about that, but there's more to Catholic apologetics than that. You see, there are more foundational issues. Traditionally speaking, Catholicism, Catholic apologetics, is built on a 3-tier structure. The most foundational issue is the existence of God, classically called the demonstratio religiosa. Philosophical arguments that show that God exists. Because if God doesn't exist, you can forget about all the other religious questions. You can forget about arguing about where's Mary in the Bible if there is no God. See what I mean? St. Thomas Aquinas talks about that in his Summa Contra Gentiles. If God does not exist, then all religious questions are off the table. That's basically what he said. So, the existence of God, the most foundational level. But we're not done. Okay, fine. Philosophical arguments can show that there's a personal creator of the universe, a designer, a ground for moral obligation. All these arguments, by the way, I defend. But we're not done. Because the next logical question is, okay, God exists, but which God is it? Is it the God of Islam, the God of Hinduism? Which God are we talking about? That brings us to step 2 of the Catholic apologetical method. What's called the demonstratio Christiana, the part that shows that Christ is that God. In other words, you know that God you learned about in philosophy class? Well, he actually showed himself and appeared and revealed himself. His name is Jesus Christ. Here's the reasons why. Boom, boom, boom. You see what I mean? Fulfillment of prophecy, miracle, etc. But even then we're not done, because we can know that God exists, we can know that Christ is that God, but there are all kinds of churches out there professing to teach what Christ taught. And they teach contradictory things, right? Some Christian churches say baptism is necessary for salvation. Other Christian churches say, no, it's not. Some Christian churches say Jesus Christ is really present in the Eucharist. Other Christian churches say, no, he's not. You see what I mean? Where do we go to get the true Christian doctrine? Which of all those churches out there is teaching the truth according to Jesus Christ himself? Well, that brings us to step 3 of the Catholic apologetical method, Demonstratio Catholica, the Catholic apologetics proper, that shows that Jesus Christ established one authoritative church, you see. So all 3 levels. God exists, Christ is that God, Christ established an authoritative church. It's kind of a 3-step process. That's what brings people into the faith, intellectually speaking, and that's what's always been classically taught. All right. So anyway, these are the areas that we have to learn. We have to do all these things. We have to be different. If you do what most parents do, usually nothing, then you're going to get what most parents get. Right? Kids walk out the church door. So faith is a treasure that is worth investing some time in. And today that means learning how to intelligently discuss it with unbelievers. So please remember, make no mistake about it, we live at a time of intellectual clash between opposing worldviews, and as a Christian, as a dad, I think we all have a duty to prepare ourselves for this battle. You see, this is one battle we can't afford to lose. We can't afford to have our kids lose their faith. The Catholic Church teaches that faith is necessary for salvation. This is one battle we can't afford to lose. So, I would highly encourage you to do these, to investigate this matter. If you want help from me, this is what I do. I've got a booth here. We've got some stuff on sale on all those levels. But please do something. Please take some time to invest in the important things and defend what you love. Christian ignorance needs to stop, so please train your mind for Christ's sake. Okay. Thank you very much.
We have a little bit of time, and thank you very much. Again, Scott M. Sullivan, and you can go to put a .com at the end of that, and that's his website. And oh, I got something for you. I was going to take it myself. There you go. Beautiful cross, and with our Lord in the middle of it. So thank you very much. And I just can't say enough, you had that quote about always be prepared to give a defense, of the hope that you have. And how cool that, like I said before, in 15 hours notice, Scott can come here and stand in front of 600 guys and give a talk like that. How many of us can do that? How many of us can answer any questions about our faith? So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions, and then we can open it up for we still have, about 20 minutes or so. So, from a practical standpoint, you gave that 3-tiered level, and take me for example. I got a 13, a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Looks like your kids may be a bit older. How do you do this? How do you teach them? And what's the instructional method when you sit down with them and you say, rather than, hey, let's open up the Summa and start reading it over, what's the practical way of getting
that's a great question. And so there are a couple ways you could do that. You could put your kids, if they're old enough, through a formal course where they get tested and make sure they know it. You can also always learn it yourself, which you should do anyway. And then it becomes kind of integrated and organic with family life. You see, my kids, they have to eat with me. You know what I mean? So I've been trained as a martial artist, we spar. You know what I mean? So I will be like, I don't really believe in morality. I'll just start throwing these little jabs and just pretend like I'm some sort of unbeliever. And so they get used to kind of batting these questions back and forth in sparring, and that's important. It's not enough just to kind of passively take this in. You got to kind of, make it your own and integrate it. That'd be like watching a DVD on how to box and then wanting to climb in the ring with Mike Tyson. You know what I mean? You don't do that, right? You watch the DVD and then what you do? You practice, all right? The lip punch, slip it. You know what I mean? You start practicing it until it becomes what? Integrated, second nature, reflections. Role playing is huge. So, kids should learn these things on their own. I mean, you can buy books on Amazon, different things, and they can read those on their own. But I do think that the integration with the role playing, sparring, in other words, is critical. Because when they leave your house, we're dads, we're protectors, and protectors of the important things, and faith is an important thing. And so, when they leave their house, I promise you in this world, they are going to get hammered. Their faith is going to get smashed with intellectual hammers all the time. It's going to be like a boxing match. And so we have to spar and prepare for that reality. I think we have to foresee that. I mean, the thing I quoted was kids are leaving the age. At the age of 13, these questions start churning early, man. 10 years old, 11 years old, they're already thinking about this stuff. And so maybe have answers ready, study ready, start preempting that, start having that discussion. We always wanted, the way when I used to train fighters was, you always want your sparring partners to be tougher than the guy you're actually going to officially fight. So their toughest sparring partner, when it comes to the faith, the toughest guy they ever met to challenge their faith, you guys. You know what I mean? Dad had the best arguments. This college professor is nothing. You see what I'm saying? My dad's a better atheist than you. He's not even an atheist. You see what I'm saying?